All right, so we're ready. Go ahead and take it away, Marcus.
Thanks, Lisa. Appreciate the intro there. My name is Marcus Chen. I'm the training specialist with the School Land Trust program. Along with me today, I have our compliance specialist, Kira Bennett. She'll be available in the chat to answer questions as we share different resources and kind of give you a roadmap for the whole year in terms of your responsibilities as a chartered business administrator that's related to the School Land Trust program. So just to give you kind of a roadmap of today's presentation, as I fumble around here with my clicker, there we go. We'll just do a brief overview of the history of the trust as well as a program interview or overview of how the system works. We'll be talking about your responsibilities and providing a timeline in which you can follow throughout the year to help guide that practice as you're supporting your charter schools with their responsibilities and their requirements. As the email mentioned, we'll be spending a lot of today talking about two major, I guess, requirements that are submitted during the year, the School Land Trust final report, as well as this upcoming plan. And then we'll also be kind of spending some time throughout the time of this meeting, sharing some new resources, some checklists that hopefully make the responsibilities a little bit easier as we go. You can also follow along on this presentation. So if you would like to keep a digital version, you can follow that tiny URL link or scan the QR code on the screen here. Kira, I want to ask you if you could do me a huge favor and just drop that tiny URL in the chat. Would you be able to do that for me? Thank you. Just so that you guys are able to follow along and then also kind of go at your own pace, just in case we're going too fast for you or too slow. So kind of an overview of the trust system here. So Kira and I both work for the School Land Trust program, which is a part of USBE, but our work is really supported by really three major other branches of the trust lands system. We have the Trust Lands Administration, which is in charge of generating the revenue from different parcels of land throughout the state of Utah. We also have the Utah School and Institutional Trust Funds Office, which takes that revenue and invests it in a way that grows not only for future students, but also reliably for present day students as well. So that distribution that you guys see every year does come from from those two offices. This third box here is where Kira and I kind of fit in. We're part of the School Land Trust program or the School Children's Trust team. And we administer the program with two others. We have Paul Planner Director as well as Laura Smith, our administrative assistant, and both of them really help kind of support councils at the school level. We also ensure that funds are being directed towards the I guess, most critical academic needs for our students. And we also help kind of work with program transparency in regard to school websites and communications. And kind of not really overseeing, but kind of supporting this whole initiative here is the Advocacy Office, and they are made up of three members who meet with other beneficiaries. So Utah schools do make up over 90% of the fund, but there are also 10 other beneficiaries that also benefit from these parcels of land throughout the state of Utah. So if you were listening to your Utah Studies teacher in seventh grade, you would see that Utah received statehood in 1896, and along with statehood, they also received these parcels of land that you can see here in blue. So across the whole entire state, there are parcels of trust lands that are generating revenue from different sources. It could be natural resources management, it could be land development, it could be grazing leases that we give to ranchers across the whole entire state. But all that revenue gets grown by the system and ultimately will be able to generate funds for schools. We show this slide just because we do want to provide some clarifying points, and it's more of an educative moment, is that oftentimes people think that trust lands and public lands are synonymous with each other. That's not actually true. These blue parcels here are specifically for trust lands and are specifically for growing that fund that we mentioned earlier on the first slide. And so to kind of summarize our work with the State Board of Education as well as the School Land Trust program, We usually show this slide to show that really what the heart of the program is to really help invest in strategies that enhance classroom instruction and improve student achievement in areas of greatest academic need. So if you've been in the program for long enough, you have been familiar with the plans that the council submit every year and how those plans kind of highlight different strategies and different things that they're doing to help enhance that classroom instruction and helping students succeed in major ways. To kind of give you I guess, a picture of how big of an impact this program has. This year we are slated to, or we have distributed about $111.3 million to all schools across Utah. For charters, that's about $13.6 million to charter schools alone there. But the reason why this program really works is not just the way that it's grown and how it's grown over time, but it's really because of the councils that are at your individual schools and the schools that you're supporting right now. So these are councils that are appointed by Utah Code and Administrative Rule. Their sole purpose is really to improve education through the discussions that they're having throughout the year. So some councils, do opt to meet monthly, some councils a little less frequently. But they're all doing the same thing, which is trying to enhance the instruction that's happening at their schools. And the way that they really do that is through the school land trust plan, which we'll be covering specifically today. That happens in conjunction with their teacher and student success plan, but it also, is happening with collaboration with discussions with teachers at the schools as well as administrators. And these councils also, beyond the school land trust plan, they're also advising and making recommendations on school-specific issues that might arise. So, for instance, we've had councils weigh in on school safety and their recommendations for those topics there. And so to help you today, we have a timeline. This is one of our major resources that we've made available to different stakeholders this year. This one is specifically for business administrators, and you can access the code there or access the tiny URL link to access this resource. This resource will be kind of guiding our discussion throughout the day today. So we'll be kind of breaking up your responsibilities month by month and kind of talk about what are some expectations, or what are some responsibilities and supports that you can provide to help support the council work throughout the year. We'll also be following this timeline. There are really three major points in regard to your work as a chartered business administrator. So currently we're kind of in that middle timeline between August and March 1st. Your councils have probably already started implementing their current plans. They're probably starting their data dives into looking at student success and what's working and what's not working. And so we'll be kind of talking about how you can support them in that first part of the year. We'll also be talking about how you can support them at these other major milestones like March 1st, wherein the final reports are due to us, as well as May 1st, when the upcoming plan and the charter assurances are submitted. And as you're working through this annual timeline, what councils are doing, what you are doing as a business administrator is really juggling 3 years or 3 sections of time at once. So you have, the current plan being implemented, the 25-26 year. Your councils are reporting their finances and what they use the funds for from the previous year and the 24-25 year. But they're also throughout the year and also later on in the year, making plans for the 26-27 year. So all the requirements today and all the responsibilities we covered today will kind of help you navigate this cycle that we go through every year. Let's talk about your responsibilities here first. So we have a few responsibilities that happen throughout the year. And really the best way to kind of frame these is that this is ongoing throughout the year as your councils are doing their work. So one of the responsibilities that really happens throughout the year is our BAs communicating and tracking SLT budgets throughout the year. That might mean regular communication about the budget with the principals and the councils. We recommend that happens monthly. but that, every school does have a different setting, a different situation. So that's one way in which BAs can support their councils throughout the year. Another thing that can help kind of communicate and track SLT budgets a little bit more effectively is making sure that in your transaction descriptions, as they're spending the money throughout the year, that the goal and the action plan steps from the plan are being referenced. This kind of helps create I guess, a cleaner audit trail, and also allows us to allows the school and you to see kind of how the funds are being used and if it's being or if it's aligned with the plan that they submit earlier in the year. Some other things that you might want to look out for is making adjustments. So if there's a need to back out funds, no lump sum adjustments should be made. All adjustments should really be made at the line item level to ensure that there's clear communication about what wasn't spent and what is being spent there. And another thing that we've seen that's been successful for our schools is implementing a pre and a post purchase process to confirm that the spending aligns with the approved SLT plan. That we don't have a system that we put in place, but we have seen some schools and some LEAs put that in place to help councils spend their funds in compliance to what they reported earlier in the year. And then the last major support that you guys are going to be giving throughout the year is really monitoring that carryover limit. One note to make is that first, no school is allowed to go over the max 10% of the current year's distribution. So this means when you're looking at the budget for SLT, that would mean that it does not include the prior year's deferred revenue. So making sure that you are removing that when you're looking at those things. If for some reason, one of the reasons why an amendment might be necessary throughout the year is the carryover limit. So one of your responsibilities as a BA throughout the year is making sure to review and approve them as they come in following governing board approval. So these are your throughout the year responsibilities. These are the things that are happening periodically throughout the year as the councils are doing their work there. For a little bit more time-specific responsibilities, you also have your responsibility to set up your access to the SLT reporting website. So in the next few slides, I'll kind of go over some of those. I have some screenshots to show you those different parts of the website that you would be responsible for. So if you do not have SLT reporting website access, this might be a good time to send a quick email to either Kira or I. Kira, could you drop our emails in the chat really quickly? Thank you. And so that way we have kind of a list of, if you do not have access yet, we can help you with that process following this meeting right away. And your access is going to allow you to access all your LEAs and kind of monitor their submissions of the different requirements that they're responsible for throughout the year. One thing to kind of keep in mind is to make sure that your current director or your current principal has access for the school. So if there are any assignment changes that happen during the summer or during this first part of the year, it'd be good to verify those contacts today. Another thing that you're going to be doing, and it kind of shows it, we'll show this on the next slide, is you'll be entering due dates on the SLT reporting website for directors and principals to submit their final report and their upcoming plan. Your deadline just needs to keep in mind that our deadlines is March 1st and May 1st for the upcoming plan. So whatever deadlines you set should really give the councils enough time to either make adjustments before final submission. To do these two responsibilities, you'll be going to the School Land Trust Reporting website. If you do not have an account yet, you'll be clicking on New Account to set up that access there. Those of you that are returning users will use that green login button. And when you go to the SLT reporting website and you log in, you'll see your school dashboard or your charter admin dashboard. And so when we talk about setting due dates, those two buttons down at the bottom where it says update date, those are the places where you'll be making those information changes there. To access the LEAs that you are responsible for, you can click on the school's dashboard button, and that'll show you the schools that you are responsible for and the different requirements that they're submitting throughout the year. So when we mention the SLT plan, you can see that the current year is that first slot. And then anytime an amendment comes, or anytime an amendment is submitted, you'll see that in the second box there, that's where you'll be doing your review. And then you can see the final report and the upcoming plan there. So all this is part of that process throughout the year as we hit those different deadlines. I'm going to take a quick stop for any questions before I move on there. Also, an opportunity for Kira to correct me if I said anything wrong or. Okay, perfect. Awesome. Cool. Other responsibilities. So into October, this is when we'll start getting ready to kind of do more of the financial stuff. So you'll be submitting your SLT expenditure records to UPEFs. So in October 2025, BAs do submit their school level expenditures to UPEFs for the fiscal year 25. This has to match what is reported in the approved SLT plan. And just a couple other notes when you're submitting these things. One is that the SLT budget or the expenses should not be mixed between other budget resources or other funding resources. And then also for any corrections, it's important that you move expenditures and not revenue. So we do want to see, we want to keep that audit trail kind of clean and also making sure that monitoring is easy that way. So SLT reporting should be happening at the expenditure level there, not at the revenue level. Some other things to consider is recertification of financial data. So if it's recertified after December 31st, this is a good time to contact Kira so she can support you there in making sure that the recertification happens smoothly. If the report was already approved for prior recertifications, the schools must resubmit, and then also the BAU must review the final report that's in the SLT website. So that's kind of the first couple of things that happen in October. In November, this is a little bit less heavy on business administrators, but more kind of a monitoring thing, is that first, new schools are kind of required to submit their SLT plans. So this is their deadline of November 1st. These other requirements that you see with asterisks next to them, you don't necessarily have involvement with these, but it is helpful to kind of monitor them just because if the schools do not submit these requirements, they won't get their SLT funding. So if you are on your SLT schools dashboard and you see that some of them are missing, it's helpful to have BA communication too with our schools to make sure that those responsibilities are being met as well. Going into January, so after the holiday break, this is when we start preparing final reports. And this is really just a report on the previous year's implementation of the plan. And so in January 2026, we receive UPEF's data and the schools have access to complete your final report. So they'll start putting in their expenses, how they use the funding, as well as answering some questions about how the plan was implemented. The deadline to keep in mind here is March 1st, so you'll set your own deadline for your schools to submit their final reports. That should give you enough time to do your review and your approval, and then send it to us before March 1st there. Another thing to consider here is that it's making sure that your principals are using accounting records in conjunction with the final report to ensure that the expenditures were in alignment with the plan that was reported in the previous year. If there are any changes from the plan, this is also an opportunity for the principals to describe those changes and why those changes occurred there. In February, another thing that we're going to start looking at is the amount of carryover that's happening at the schools. And so, as we mentioned before, that max number is no more than 10% of the current year's distribution. And so in this year, we send a report to schools identifying the schools that have excessive carryover. and then also providing instructions for how to remedy that situation there. So you'll be receiving funding projections from us, from USBE, and then the councils start writing their plans based on that. So all this is kind of happening all at once, but the two major things to look out for is one, that excessive carryover, and then two is that funding projection that comes from USBE and reporting that to schools so that they have their appropriate numbers to plan for the upcoming year. In March, after all that preparation, you'll start reviewing those, or that's when the final report is due for final approval. So, as we mentioned before, the final report is just a report on the use of SLT funds and also any explanations for why there is misalignment between the intended plan and the expenditures that were reported there. So in this case here, the most important thing here is that accuracy is critical. So making sure that whatever is reported in your financial records also matches what is reported to us at the School Land Trust. So what do we look for in a final report? The process is pretty simple. Like I mentioned, the principal is going to enter and submit the final report on the reporting website. You, as the charter admin, will review it and making sure that it matches your records. And if it does not, you'll send it back to them and kind of start that communication to make those edits. But once it's approved by you, it goes to us at the State Board of Education. But one thing that we do want to make sure that schools are doing is that they're also providing a report to their charter governing boards by March 1st. You do see the final reports before the governing board for these final reports. And so it is important to make sure that the principal or sends a copy of those reports to the LEA governing board there. Any questions about final reports? Kira, anything that I missed? Perfect. Still moving. All right. A few things to keep in mind as you're reviewing your criteria of the final report. One is making sure that the financial chart matches what the LEA has in their financial records for SLT. So that's one thing to consider as you're doing your final report check. Another thing is to make sure that all expenditures that are reported are allowable under program rule. We'll be doing a deep dive into allowable and unallowable expenses when we talk about the upcoming plan. But your review of the final report really does serve as a check to make sure that the expenditures are allowable and being used appropriately. Another thing to keep in mind as you're reviewing your final reports is making sure that there's no negative carryover, as well as no blank sections in the final report. Those questions give us insight into how the funds were being spent, and also as a chance for any misalignment to be explained by the principal. So that just it's important to make sure that none of those boxes are left blank. Another thing to also keep in mind is that any deviations from the original plan should be explained. So like I mentioned before, this is a chance for them to kind of explain those changes that might happen throughout the year. And another thing that happens more frequently than not is making sure that there's no identifying student data or spelling errors, just making sure that it's professional, but also making sure that there's no personally identifiable information as well. Another resource for you guys, if you do have the electronic copy of this presentation, you're able to access this final report review guide, which takes you through the different deadlines as well as the criteria that we have mentioned so far in this presentation. Great. Now we are looking into May, or into springtime, so April and May, and this is when the review of the upcoming plans begins. And so what we're looking for here is one, making sure that the business administrators review and approve those plans before May 1st, just like the final reports, making sure that your due date gives you enough time to do revisions and make sure that it's a fully polished product before getting to us at the school board for review. in this case here for upcoming plans, your review actually happens after the governing board. So whereas the final report, you see the final report and then the governing board gets a summary. In the case of the upcoming plan, the governing board does their approval first, and then you'll see your approval pop up on the school land trust reporting website. Before you initiate review, we highly recommend, or it's required that you have the date of the official approval by the Charter Governing Board, since you will be entering that date as a part of your approval there. Another thing to keep in mind is if there are any issues that you see, so unallowable expenses, or any other types of compliance issues, it is important to, send those plans back to the school level. So, in our department, we use the term what do we say, Kira? It's a fully polished product, right? Making sure that, the plans are fully polished before getting to our review at the state. So what are we reviewing for in our SLT plans? And also this applies to amendments throughout the year. So as you're reviewing amendments, you are looking out for these things as well. As I mentioned in the review process or the overview of the approvals, it does start at the council level, and it goes to the LEA governing board before it goes to you as the LEA admin. And anytime there's an edit, so whether it's an edit from or request for edit from the governing board, or a request for edit from you or us at the state board, it will go back to the council for editing and to make sure that it's redone. So there are different parts to the SLT plan, and the first thing that you're going to see in your review is the goal criteria. And so this is really something that we often see schools kind of overthink. And all it has to be really is just a 1 to 2 simple explanation of what the school hopes students will achieve in one academic year. And so in this example here, you can see that there's a clear time frame, right? So by the end of the 2025-2026 school year, 75% of all students will achieve proficiency or higher on the state-administered RISE test. There's a time frame there, there's a clear benchmark, as well as what area of academic focus they're going to have in the school here. A couple things to make note of and to watch out for is that the goal should not be behavioral. It shouldn't include any type of like leadership development, and it shouldn't be an SEL goal. So going back to our initial slide about what the intent of the program is, it's really about academic instruction in the most critical academic areas. And so the goal should really reflect that purpose there. After councils identify their goal statement, you're going to be looking at and reviewing their academic areas. And so in this section here, it's just a couple things to make sure that happen is one, making sure that the academic areas that are selected are aligned to the goal statement. So, if a school reports a goal statement that has a math focus, we shouldn't see math and something else selected there. Oftentimes, schools will want to do some cross-curricular, projects and things to support a certain academic area. One thing to consider is that if there is some type of cross-curricular activity, so for instance, elementary schools will use art to support math instruction, that should be highlighted in the action plan steps section, not in the academic areas. And then another thing to also consider is that this academic area criteria is not just aligned to the goal statement, but it's also aligned to the measurement section, which we'll cover in the next slide. But schools will be kind of, reporting on how they're going to be tracking progress and how they're going to be tracking success throughout the year. So it's important to make sure that whatever measurements they report are aligned to the actual academic area. So for instance, if it's going to be math instruction, there should be some type of math measurement tool there. It could be a summative assessment, so like RISE or Acadience, but it could also be formative assessments that are reported at the school level. So school teachers will, create those common and formative assessments. Those can also be measurement tools. The one big thing to look out for, though, is that it's aligned to the academic areas that are being reported in the plan. So those are those three sections kind of happen. Um, those all should be aligned together, and they also should be aligned to the action plan steps and the expenditures that the schools report. And so, a couple things to look out for when you're reviewing your action plan step sections for your schools. One is making sure that the action plan steps are clearly stating what is going to be purchased, right? And we're also going to ask schools in our trainings for this section, we also ask schools to explain how this action step supports the academic goal. So that's also another thing to kind of look out for in your review is making sure that, if a school reports that they're going to hire a paraprofessional or a reading specialist, that there should be some type of explanation for how that supports the overall academic goal there. One thing that is optional and does help us at the review level is making sure that the action plan steps are numbered. And you can also make sure that the school has the capacity to actually implement this plan. So, as much as we want to solve everything in education, there are some limits that we have here in terms of what we can do. One other thing to look out for too is that making sure that the purchases that are explained or highlighted in the action plan steps, they should be specific. So if there's any uncertainty about what the funds are being used for, or if our description's too broad, making sure that those points of revision are clarified by the school or by the principal there. A couple other things that we'll cover we'll cover allowables in just a moment here. Another thing to also keep in mind is some schools do report or use funding for incentives for students. There is a current limit of $2 per student per plan, but it is also up for pending board rule update in FY27. So that might go up to $4. So just to be kind of put that on your radar as you're reviewing these plans in the upcoming year. Another thing to also look out for is mini grants, which are just really broad descriptions or placeholders for funding. These mini grants tend to be non-specific, and so that's usually a huge point of revision is making sure that there's a specificity in all the descriptions that are highlighted in the action plan steps. Another thing to keep in mind is we do want to, allow for flexibility in the school land trust plan. So one thing to kind of consider here is the usage of a backup plan. And so you can see an example here from one of our schools. I believe this is in Southern Utah. But the original action plan step is that they're going to hire hourly personnel to support those reading groups. They also put in parentheses the amount of money that they're allocating towards that funding or that action step. But we also know that sometimes hourly personnel are not able to meet their numbers or they're not able to fulfill all those planned hours. And so what the school did was they implemented a backup plan. And one thing to note here for this backup plan that it is one aligned to the academic area, right? So it was a reading goal specifically. And also there's a level of specificity here that shows us if the funds aren't used completely for the hourly personnel, this is what the school is going to use those funds for. So you can see that this creates a little bit more flexibility. It also kind of bypasses, or I guess, it does bypass the amendment process and kind of streamlines things so that the school doesn't have to wait for board approval to spend those funds. So that is another option in the toolkit for councils as they're writing their plans. In conjunction to the action plan step section, there's also the expenditure section. And this is where it's just really a detailed record of how the funding is going to be spent. And so a couple things to look out for. One is making sure that each plan expenditure is linked to an action step that's reported in the previous section. And then also making sure that that expenditure is appropriately categorized. So if it's going to be, that hourly personnel, that would be categorized under people or salaries and benefits, right? Another thing to look out for too is that if the action plan steps contain estimated amounts, the amounts reported in the expenditure table should also exactly match that estimate that's in the action plan steps. So for instance, here, like the 30,000 that's in parentheses for the hourly personnel, that should match what is reported in the expenditure table. This also brings up the last point, which is in terms of backup plans, these do not have to be categorized in the chart. They just need to be in the action plan steps there. Questions about these two sections for action plan steps and expenditures? Cool. And then the last section, or a couple things before we move on to the last overview, is just making sure what is allowable and what's unallowable. Instead of kind of going through this list item by item, one thing to kind of keep in mind as you're reviewing the plans is, asking the question, does this purchase or does this expenditure support classroom instruction, right? And so we can draw a line between these really these 6 bullet points and draw a line towards classroom instruction and academic success, right? Whereas these expenditures, which we would call unallowable, it's much harder to make that connection between these expenditures and classroom instruction. So for instance, like a coffee table in the teacher lounge or, those types of things would be harder to, support classroom instruction and would also be considered unallowable there. One thing that has come up as a question recently in trainings that I thought was kind of interesting is the purchase of bike racks. This would be considered storage of personal student property, so you wouldn't be able to spend SLT funds on bike racks. But also, it goes back to that academic piece, right? Does it support classroom instruction that enhances student learning? So these would be the unallowable expenditures under program rule. To give you another resource that supports you in your review, we also have this expenditure guide that highlights all the information that I just mentioned under allowable and unallowable expenses, as well as some best practices for what to look out for as you're reviewing these specific sections of the plan. The last thing you're going to look out for is the council plan approvals. And so on the plan, principals are going to report the number of approval votes, the number of non-approvals, and the number of absent members at the meeting in which the vote occurred for the school land trust plan. So one thing to look out for in your review as a business administrator is making sure that the number here, so if we added up number approved, not approved, and absent, that total should match the number that's reported in the council membership form. Your councils do have access to change that membership form throughout the year, so that is a living document. But one thing to make sure is that this council vote that's reported on the school land trust plan should match the number that's reported in the council membership form. It's also important to note that a quorum of council members should be present to approve the plan. So here you have or not present, I'm sorry, a quorum is required for approval of the plan. So in this example here, we have 5 approved, which would be a quorum. So that was one common reason why plans were sent back last year. So this would be something to kind of look out for a little bit more diligently this year as we're doing our reviews. Some other things to look out for, is making sure that there's accuracy in your estimated amount spent for the current year, and making sure that number is confirmed by an accountant and you. Making sure that the summary of estimated expenditures, so there's a row on the expenditure below the expenditure table that shows this amount, and that should be we should make sure that that number is greater than 0. And if it's not, making sure that the school does enter the appropriate number there. One thing to also make sure is that the publicity method, so the way that they report the plan to the public is appropriate for the school. So for instance, if you're a virtual school, making sure that there's some type of newsletter or some type of email communication that's being sent out to parents. All the other things like, acronym definition, spelling errors, these are all really grammar and convention things that should be happening as a part of being a fully polished product. Oh, Kira, it's a well-polished product, right? There we go. I got it. We got it. Perfect. Okay. So here is kind of the whole plan and kind of a sky view here. So you have a goal statement that clearly identifies, the benchmark that the council hopes to achieve. Also, what area is going to be addressed. So we know that the academic area is going to be reading. We also have a clear measurement of how the council is going to be tracking that progress through the year. And then we also have action plan steps that are specific with explanations for how they support the overall goal. And then you also have the council vote as well as the expenditure table there. All this is outlined in our review guide as well as a rubric that we've developed for BA specifically for LEA reviewers. And so I guess our method of review uses this rubric, and so we're trying to align our review and the reviews that's happening at the LEA level to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page when it comes to reviewing these plans. This is just a quick outline of the amendment process. So like I said, amendments really do act the same as all the information that we've covered thus far, and the review process is exactly the same thing here. A couple of reasons why the school might submit an amendment. One thing to keep in mind, as we mentioned before, is that carryover limit, making sure that it's not over 10% of the current year's distribution. There are times in which a council might want to change directions, so maybe they change from a reading focus to a math focus after their first council meeting. That would be grounds for changing the plan and submitting an amendment. If there are significant spending changes, that's also another reason to submit an amendment. Each LEA probably has a little bit of their own threshold, so communicating with your governing boards and with your schools would probably be the best point of discussion there to make sure that you're all on the same page about what is significant spending and what is not there. One thing to keep in mind, like I said, is you can, to bypass amendments, you can use that backup plan. In the case of these significant changes, you'd probably need to go through an amendment process, which would involve getting an agenda spot for the next governing board meeting there. Another thing to keep in mind too is for further training and for further resources, you can go to our school website here to get more resources and guides, checklists, as well as timelines that I've mentioned today to kind of support your instruction and your practice at the school level. Another thing too is beyond our school website, there's also Kira and I. So you have our group email, and we are usually fighting to respond most quickly. So, feel free to email us at that group email here for any other questions. I believe that's all I have here, Lisa. I'm going to leave it open to, well, Kira, do you have any clarifying points?
The only thing I'd further clarify is that by attending today, you have met your requirement for annual training for the School Land Trust program. So you'll just want to mark today's date or send it to the director at the schools that you serve, because they'll have to put today's date in the assurance they submit at the end of the year that you attended it.
Great. And then it looks like we have a question about substantial changes to an expenditure exceeding it by, let's say, 10%. Is there a threshold? I don't have a clear-cut number. Kira, do you have any insight on that?
No, that's been determined to be under the authority of the local governing board. So whatever the governing board said is substantial is what is the definition of it is locally.
Perfect. Okay,
And
we'll
I
open up
guess,
to.
oh, sorry, Marcus. On our end, to further clarify that, so if we do a compliance review and we see that, say, like salaries and benefits were planned for 50,000, and say that the school spent 60,000 on it, We don't have, we wouldn't flag that on our end. We would say as long as it was spent in the way that it was approved, that is fine. But sometimes a governing board will say, we only approved you guys for up to 50,000. Why are you spending 10,000 more? So that's where that local control comes in. It's really not our purview at the USBE to determine that. So hopefully that's helpful.
Cool. Other questions?
Quiet in the chat.
It's all good. If there are questions, I'm sure questions will come up throughout the year. Like I said, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help. So I'll turn it back over to Lisa. Yeah, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marcus and Kira. We always appreciate it when you're here with us. All right, everybody. So that ends our meeting for today. I did, however, before we leave, just want to kind of give you an idea of what's coming up in the next few months. So we do have some USBE trainings happening in November. That'll be November 19th and November 20th. The 19th one is for mid-year updates. The one on the 20th is the indirect cost rate. If you should have received links to those, but if you need any further information on how to get in on those meetings, just let me know and I'll get that information to you. We are going to do those meetings in lieu of our November meeting, so we won't be having an SCSB meeting for November. Yeah. And then in December, we are going to go ahead and cancel it, of course, because there's so much going on in December already. It's just easier if we let that one, just skip that one. It's a good time to skip it. And then we will resume in January again. I don't know what we'll be talking about in January. In February, we will be doing our annual financial review. We will have the results of our new financial framework by that time, and we'll go ahead and talk about the framework again and how it works and what the results were overall, what we saw. And then again, we have to determine the rest of them for the rest of the year, but that's what's coming up in the next few months. I hope you guys have a great day, and we'll see you back here on our Zoom meetings in January. Have a good one, guys.